two most mysterious battles in the Bible. Number 1. The day that God took over the battle. The story of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, provides helpful instruction on prayer and trusting God when we face severe trials. Jehoshaphat was a king who made it a priority to follow the Lord and work towards reconciling the Israelites with God. He ruled in the southern kingdom at the same time that the wicked Ahab ruled in the north. Jehoshaphat was a good king, but he had a character flaw, which was that he made unwise alliances with the godless Ahab. He went into battle with Ahab and almost lost his life. He arranged for his son to marry Ahab and Jezebel's wicked daughter, Athaliah. Later on, she eliminated everyone in the Davidic line, with the exception of Jehoshaphat. Also formed an ill-fated business alliance with Ahab's son, Ahaziah. Jehoshaphat was shaken up one morning when his intelligence sources came rushing in with the horrifying news. 2 Chronicles 20 verses 1-3. Now it came about after this that the sons of Moab and the sons of Ammon, together with some of the Meunites, came to make war against Jehoshaphat. Then some came and reported to Jehoshaphat, saying, "A great multitude is coming against you from beyond the sea, from Aram, and behold, they are in Hazazon Tamar, that is En-gedi." Jehoshaphat was afraid and turned his attention to seek the Lord, and he proclaimed a period of fasting throughout Judah. What would you do if you heard threatening reports that impacted your future and life? This godly king did the right thing. He called a national prayer meeting and encouraged the people to trust God in the face of this overwhelming crisis. They did it, and literally won the war by prayer alone, without swinging a single sword. Their story teaches us that Jehoshaphat reminded the Lord that the Jews were his covenant people. Jehoshaphat went to the temple to pray. The temple where Jehoshaphat was praying was God's sanctuary and the place where he promised to hear and answer prayer. Those to whom Israel had once shown kindness were now coming to destroy her and take away her land. Jehoshaphat closed his passionate appeal and, with all Judah, stood before the Lord awaiting his answer. Then, in the midst of the assembly, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, the Levite of the sons of Asaph. And he said, "Listen, all you of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat, this is what the Lord says to you. Do not fear or be dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours but God's. Tomorrow, go down against them. Behold, they will come up by the ascent of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the valley in front of the wilderness of Jerul. You need to fight in this battle. Take your position. Stand and watch the salvation of the Lord in your behalf, Judah and Jerusalem. Do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow, go out and face them, for the Lord is with you." 2 Chronicles 20, verses 14-17. The Spirit of the Lord was expressed through Jahaziel, dispelling the fear that had grabbed the nation. The battle was God's. The people had only to go out the next day and see what he had done. Even before their victory came to pass, the people rejoiced in their victory by faith. At dawn the following day, they awoke to see what the Lord had done. Their march to the battlefield resembled a festival with singers leading the way. When they began singing and praising, the Lord set ambushes against the sons of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come against Judah, so they were struck down. For the sons of Ammon and Moab rose against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, completely destroying them. And when they had finished with the inhabitants of Seir, they helped to destroy one another. When Judah came to the watchtower of the wilderness, they turned toward the multitude, and behold, they were corpses lying on the ground, and there was no survivor. When Jehoshaphat and his people came to take their spoils, they found much among them, including goods, garments, and valuable things which they took for themselves, more than they could carry. And they were taking the spoils for 3 days because there was so much. Then on the 4th day, they assembled in the valley of Barakah, for they blessed the Lord there. Therefore, they have named that place the Valley of Barakah until today. Every man of Judah and Jerusalem returned with Jehoshaphat at their head, returning to Jerusalem with joy, for the Lord had helped them to rejoice over their enemies. They came to Jerusalem with harps, lyres, and trumpets to the house of the Lord. And the dread of God was on all the kingdoms of the lands when they heard that the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. So the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was at peace, for his God gave him rest on all sides. 2 Chronicles 20, verses 22 to 30. Upon Judah's arrival, the only thing left was collecting the spoil, which took 3 days. Their joy was unbounded as they returned to Jerusalem singing praises to the Lord. The neighboring countries took notice, and Judah enjoyed peace. What an unusual strategy, but it turned out to be the most effective. The enemies ended up fighting themselves, and Jehoshaphat's prophetic word that they would not need to fight in the battle was fulfilled. Jehoshaphat's response was to raise an altar of praise when he encountered enemies greater than him and his nation. Hostile nations, each bigger and stronger than Judah, joined forces to fight. The thought of what could happen to them terrified the king. If the king was terrified, then the citizens felt helpless. But King Jehoshaphat reminded himself that he had a mighty source of strength. So he gathered all of Judah to pray and fast as they sought the help of the Lord. In the prayers, God said they should go to the battle with praise. Praise brought God into that battlefield. Many Bible characters were people of praise and worship because they saw God as more significant than their circumstances. It's easy to read this story and miss what a great thing it was for Jehoshaphat to call the nation to prayer over this crisis. It would have been very human to panic. When he heard the news of this army within his borders, we could understand if he yelled, "Call all my top generals! Get the army mobilized immediately! We don't have a second to waste!" As soon as the troops were mustered, if there was time, he could have stopped for a quick word of prayer. But for Jehoshaphat to turn his attention to seek the Lord and to call the nation to prayer and fasting was not automatic. Not only could Jehoshaphat have reacted with panic, he also could have felt angry toward God. Number 2. 185,000 soldiers was defeated by an angel. The Word of God speaks of God's intervention in the issues of His people. The story of Hezekiah and his numerous enemies is one of the most outstanding examples of such. Hezekiah was a man who was the polar opposite of his terrible father, Ahaz. During his reign, he received the uncommon honor of doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his forefather David had done. Hezekiah was one of the few knights who abolished the high places of worship. He also cut down the idolatrous Assyrian poles. Furthermore, he destroyed the bronze snake Moses created centuries before, known as Nehushtan, which means a bronze thing. What a pity that this object God used to deliver his people had become a source of worship. For these and other reasons, Hezekiah was regarded as a king who stood apart from and above the other kings of Judah in his adherence to God's commands. After reading about the unfaithfulness and heinous actions of so many of Israel's and Judah's kings, King Hezekiah is a breath of fresh air. He prospered wherever he went because the Lord was with him. 2 Kings 18 verses 13 to 16, New American Standard Bible. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib king of Assyria marched against all of the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent messages to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, "I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will endure." So the king of Assyria imposed on Hezekiah, king of Judah, the payment of 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah then gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and he gave it to the king of Assyria. Sennacherib, the successor to Shalmaneser, the conqueror of Israel, was the Assyrian king Hezekiah would face. Sennacherib attacked and conquered all of Judah's fortified cities, leaving only Jerusalem. And at that point, Hezekiah may have concluded that he had grossly miscalculated the situation. The demand was enormous. However, things were about to get worse. God would circle the Assyrians around Jerusalem to test Hezekiah's faith and demonstrate his mighty power to his people. Sennacherib either didn't think Hezekiah's ransom was enough, or he was looking for a reason to attack Jerusalem and complete his conquest of Judah anyway, because the Assyrian king sent a delegation and a massive army to Jerusalem to demand the city surrender. They wanted to deliver this to the king in person. Sennacherib's royal spokesman made what he thought was a factly case for Hezekiah and his people to open their gates and surrender. After all, their northern neighbors had fallen to Assyria, and those same cruel conquerors were now at their gates. Infuriated by this encounter, Hezekiah's men returned to the king, their clothes torn in distress. When King Hezekiah heard their report, he did the same thing his men did. He tore his clothes in grief. He had to wonder how such a terrible turn of events had occurred. After all, he had been obedient to God. He had renewed Judah's worship. He had followed the Lord's instructions. He had previously prospered as a result of God's providence, but God was deafeningly silent at the time. King Hezekiah went into the Lord's temple to worship despite his distress. Furthermore, he did something that many of his predecessors did not. He sent a delegation dressed in sackcloth to seek a word from the Lord through the prophet Isaiah. They explained to the God's prophet Judah's dire situation, and they informed him that the Assyrian leader had come back to mock the living God. Isaiah already knew all of this because God knew all of this. As a result, he gave the servants a message for Hezekiah that began with the command, "Don't be afraid." This command frequently appears in the Bible. It's God's way of calming his people, instilling confidence in them, and assuring them that I have everything under control. You can rely on me. The Lord had not only heard the blasphemous words of the Assyrian king's lackey, but he also planned to respond to them. Instead of defeating Jerusalem, King Sennacherib would return to his own land and die by the sword. Then something changed. Sennacherib's royal spokesman was most likely camped at Jerusalem's walls waiting for an answer from Hezekiah when word came that the king had pulled his army out of Lachish and was fighting at Libnah, which was 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem. Sennacherib had heard that King Tirhakah of Cush was preparing to fight him, which caused the Assyrian king to divert his attention away from Jerusalem for what he thought was only a short time. Sennacherib made certain that Hezekiah knew he would return by repeating the threats made by his underling earlier. Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent messengers to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, "I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will endure." So the king of Assyria imposed on Hezekiah, king of Judah, the payment of 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah then gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At the time, Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and he gave it to the king of Assyria. Then the king of Assyria sent Tartan, Rabsaris, and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a large army to Jerusalem. So they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they went up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the road of the fuller's field. Then they called to the king, and Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was in charge of the household, Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the secretary went out to them. And Rabshakeh said to them, "Say now to Hezekiah, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. What is this confidence that you have? You say, but they are only empty words. I have a plan and strength for the war. Now on whom have you relied, that you have revolted against me? Now behold, you have relied on the support of this broken reed on Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. That is how Pharaoh, king of Egypt, is to all who rely on him. However, if you say to me, we have trusted in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has removed, and has said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now then, come make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to put riders on them. How then can you drive back even one official of the least of my master's servants and rely on Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Have I now come up without the Lord's approval against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this man and destroy it. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, Shebna, and Joah, said to Rabshakeh, speak now to your servants in Aramaic, because we understand it, and do not speak with us in Judean, so that the people who are on the wall hear you. But Rabshakeh said to them, has my master sent me only to your master and to you to speak these words? Has he not also sent me to the men who sit on the wall, doomed to eat their own dung and drink their own urine with you? Then Rabshakeh stood up and shouted with a loud voice in Judean, saying, hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. 2 Kings 18 verses 14 to 28. God heard Hezekiah and reacted to him once more through Isaiah. Sennacherib is mocked in this poetic response which praises God's sovereign rule over the nations. The Assyrian king had not only mocked Judah and her king, he had also mocked and blasphemed the Holy One of Israel. While Sennacherib arrogantly assumed his leadership and might have cut a swath through many nations, he had no idea that God had predetermined his victories as part of his plan. The Assyrian king was then just a pawn on God's kingdom chessboard. Sennacherib couldn't make a move or have a private thought that God wasn't aware of, including any rage he directed at the Lord. On the other hand, Sennacherib would discover how insignificant he was when God inserted his hook into his nose and dragged him back to Assyria. God spoke words of comfort to a king and his people facing an unavoidable siege and starvation. For fear of the Assyrians, the people of Jerusalem had been unable to go outside the walls to plant crops. But God's sign to Hezekiah was that the people of Jerusalem would eat harvests from seed that grew on its own for the next 2 years. They could sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat their fruit in the 3rd year. Judah would not be destroyed. A remnant would survive, bear fruit, and leave the walls of Jerusalem, because the Lord is zealous for his glory and his covenant people. God would defend Jerusalem against Sennacherib. He said he would do it for my sake and my servant David's sake. God would not let some inexperienced Assyrian king derail his plans. He would also keep his promise to David to keep one of his descendants on the throne of Jerusalem forever. A promise that would eventually culminate in the kingship of Jesus Christ our Lord. Then it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went forth and struck down 185,000 men in the camp of the Assyrians. When the survivors got up early in the morning, behold, all 185,000 of them were dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, left and returned home, and lived at Nineveh. It came about as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that his sons Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with a sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon his son became king in his place. It only took one strike from the Lord's angel to rid Hezekiah of his foe. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers were slain in an instant. Sennacherib was suddenly forced to return home without his army. Later, while worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his own sons murdered him. Like the Philistine Goliath, the Assyrian king had mocked the Lord for failing to protect Jerusalem. But in the end, Sennacherib's God could not save his devoted disciple, even in his own temple. This story is a good reminder that faithfulness to God does not protect you from adversity. It does, however, prepare you for those trials. You will be better prepared to deal with trouble and suffering if you live your life from a divine perspective, to rely on Him in bad times as much as you have in good. You will also have the opportunity to witness God at work. However, some people failed the battle of their lives. To watch the story of Cain, click here.